The bullet had torn through Donovan Mitchell's shoulder during a robbery gone wrong at the general store in Independence, Missouri. And by the time he stumbled out of town into the August heat of 1878, infection had already begun spreading its poisonous fingers through his veins. He did not remember falling from his horse 3 miles outside town, nor did he recall the days that followed as fever consumed him like wildfire through dry prairie grass. What he did remember, when consciousness finally returned to him in fragmented pieces, was the cool touch of a woman's hand on his burning forehead and the sound of her voice, low and soothing, telling him he was going to live even though every fiber of his being screamed that death had already claimed him. When Donovan finally opened his eyes with any real awareness, the first thing he saw was the rough-hewn ceiling of a small cabin, and the second was her face hovering above him, framed by dark hair that fell in waves around her shoulders. She had green eyes that reminded him of spring grass after rain, and there was something fierce in them, something that told him she had fought death itself to keep him breathing. "You are awake," she said, and her voice carried the same determination he saw in her eyes. "Really awake this time, not just the fever talking through you." Donovan tried to speak, but his throat felt like he had swallowed sand. She anticipated his need and brought a cup of water to his lips, supporting his head with one hand while he drank. The simple act exhausted him, and he fell back against the pillow, breathing hard. "Easy now," she said. "You have been dancing with death for near 2 weeks. Your body needs time to remember how to live." "Who are you?" he managed to rasp out. "Katherine Lawson," she replied, setting the cup aside. "And you are on my property, though I confess I did not invite you. You and your horse came stumbling onto my land like ghosts, and you fell right off your saddle not 20 yards from my door. I thought you were dead at first." Donovan tried to piece together his scattered memories. The robbery, the bullet, riding away from town because he could not risk being caught by the law with a fresh wound. He had been on the wrong side of that robbery trying to stop it, but he knew how it would look. "The bullet," he said, and his hand moved weakly toward his shoulder. "I took it out," Katherine said matter-of-factly. "It was deep, and the wound had already gone bad with infection. I have spent every day since cleaning it, changing the bandages, forcing willow bark tea down your throat when you were too far gone in fever to know what was happening. There were times I thought you would not make it through the night." "Why?" Donovan asked, searching her face. "Why not just let me die or take me to town?" Something flickered across Katherine's features, something complex and hard to read. "Because I know what it is like to be hurt and have no one care whether you live or die. And because taking you to town in your condition would have killed you before we made it halfway there. Now stop asking fool questions and rest. You are not out of danger yet." She moved away from the bed, and Donovan watched her go about her tasks in the small cabin. She moved with the efficiency of someone used to doing everything alone, and he noticed there were no signs of anyone else living there. No man's boots by the door, no extra coat hanging on the peg, just her and the simple necessities of frontier life. Over the following days, Donovan slowly regained his strength under Katherine's careful tending. She fed him broth, and then gradually more solid food. She changed his bandages with gentle but firm hands, and though the process hurt enough to make him break out in cold sweat, he never once heard her apologize or soften her ministrations. She did what needed doing, and he respected that. As he grew stronger, he learned more about her. Katherine had been living alone on this land for 2 years, ever since her husband died of cholera. They had come west together from Illinois, full of dreams about starting fresh, but disease had stolen those dreams before they could even break ground on the farm they had planned. She had stayed because she had nowhere else to go and because, As she put it, she was too stubborn to let the frontier break her. "You not get lonely out here?" Donovan asked one evening as she sat mending one of his shirts by lamplight. He was finally well enough to sit up in bed for longer periods, though standing still made him dizzy. Katherine did not look up from her stitching. "Lonely is better than being hurt," she said. "And the land does not care if I am a woman alone. It treats everyone with the same indifference. That is a hard way to live. Hard living is all I have known for a while now." She bit off the thread and examined her work. "Your shirt had more holes than fabric. The bullet was the least of its problems." Donovan smiled despite himself. "I am not much for sewing, clearly." She tossed the shirt to him. "You can try wearing it tomorrow if you think you can manage getting dressed, though I warn you, standing is going to be harder than you think." She was right. The next morning, when Donovan tried to stand with Katherine's help, his legs shook like a newborn calf's and the room spun around him. She caught him before he fell, her arms surprisingly strong for someone so slight. "I told you," she said, but there was no mockery in her voice, just patience. "Your body has been through a war. You cannot expect it to surrender its weakness all at once." They stood there for a moment, Donovan leaning heavily on her, breathing hard from just the effort of being upright. He was acutely aware of how close she was, how she smelled faintly of soap, and the lavender she grew in a small garden behind the cabin. It was the first time in longer than he could remember that he had been this close to a woman, and certainly the first time one had shown him such kindness without wanting something in return. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything. I know I have not said it properly yet, but you saved my life." Katherine looked up at him, and for a moment something passed between them, something neither could quite name. Then she cleared her throat and helped him back to the bed. "You can thank me by getting strong enough to leave. I did not go through all that work just to have you die of stubbornness now." But as the days passed and Donovan grew stronger, the thought of leaving began to weigh on him in ways he had not expected. He found himself looking forward to their conversations in the evening, to the way Katherine's face softened when she talked about her plans for the land, to the rare times she smiled at something he said. He started helping with small tasks as his strength returned, insisting on earning his keep despite her protests. "You are still healing," Katherine said one morning when she found him trying to chop wood one-handed. "And I am going mad just lying in that bed," Donovan replied, setting down the axe. "Let me do something useful, please." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Fine, but you do small tasks only. I did not spend 2 weeks keeping you alive just to watch you tear yourself apart again through pride." They fell into a rhythm after that. Donovan would do what he could, careful not to push too hard while Katherine handled the heavier work. They talked while they worked, sharing stories of their pasts. Donovan told her about growing up in Kentucky, about how he had come west after his parents died to make his own way. He told her about working as a ranch hand, as a deputy for a time, doing whatever honest work he could find. What he did not tell her yet was why he had been in that general store when the robbery happened, why he had a bullet in his shoulder and had run instead of staying to explain. That truth felt too complicated, too risky to share when everything between them still felt so fragile. Katherine, for her part, spoke more openly about her past as the days went by. She told him about her marriage, about how young she and her husband had been when they wed, both of them barely more than children with stars in their eyes. She spoke about the journey west, the hopes they had carried, and the swift, brutal way disease had ended everything. "I was angry for a long time," she admitted one evening as they sat on the small porch watching the sun set over the prairie. "Angry at him for dying, angry at God for taking him, angry at myself for not being able to stop it. I think that anger is what kept me going at first. I was too furious to give up." "And now?" Donovan asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Now I am just trying to build something that will last. Even if it is just me and this cabin and a few acres of land. Something that says I was here, that I mattered." Donovan understood that feeling more than he could say. He had spent most of his adult life drifting from place to place, never putting down roots, never letting himself care too much about anything or anyone. It was safer that way, or so he had told himself. But sitting here with Katherine, watching the way the fading light painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, he felt something shift inside him. A longing for something more than just survival, more than just the next job or the next town. It was a dangerous feeling, and he knew it. 3 weeks after he had first woken in her cabin, Donovan was finally strong enough to take care of himself without help. His shoulder still ached and would for some time, but the wound had closed cleanly thanks to Katherine's diligent care. He could ride if he needed to, could work a full day without collapsing from exhaustion. He could leave, but he found himself inventing reasons to stay. There was a fence that needed mending, a leak in the roof that would only get worse when the rains came, firewood that needed chopping for the coming winter. Katherine did not send him away, but neither did she ask him to stay. They existed in a strange sort of limbo, both aware that a decision loomed but neither quite ready to face it. The tension between them grew in other ways too. Donovan caught himself watching Katherine as she worked, admiring the determined set of her jaw, the way she pushed hair back from her face when she was concentrating. He noticed how her rare smiles transformed her entire face, how her laugh, when he managed to coax it from her, sounded like music. And sometimes he caught her watching him too, her green eyes thoughtful and unreadable. One evening in early September, a storm rolled in across the prairie with the fury that only late summer storms could muster. Lightning split the sky and thunder shook the cabin walls. Donovan had been sleeping in the barn since he recovered enough to move around on his own, giving Katherine her privacy back, but she appeared at the barn door soaked to the skin. "The roof is leaking worse than I thought," she shouted over the roar of the storm. "Half the cabin is going to flood if this keeps up." They spent the next hour moving her belongings away from the leaks, placing every pot and bucket they could find to catch the water pouring through the damaged roof. By the time they finished, both were soaked and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Katherine stood in the center of her cabin, water dripping from her hair, looking at the ceiling with an expression of such defeat that something cracked in Donovan's chest. "I will fix it," he said. "As soon as the storm passes, I will fix it properly." "You do not have to do that," Katherine said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You have already done so much." "I want to," Donovan said, and he realized it was true. He wanted to fix her roof, to shore up her fences, to do all the 100 small things that made life out here possible. He wanted to stay, and the realization terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. "Katherine, I want to help you, if you will let me." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw his own longing reflected in her eyes. But he also saw fear there, the fear of trusting again, of opening herself up to the possibility of loss. "Why?" she asked, and the single word carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. Donovan took a step closer, then another, until only a few feet separated them. Water continued to drip from the ceiling in a steady rhythm, punctuating the silence. "Because in the 3 weeks I have been here, I have felt more alive than I have in years," he said. "Because you saved my life, and I want to spend whatever time I have left making sure you do not regret it. Because when I think about leaving, about riding away and never seeing you again, I feel like I am losing something I did not even know I needed until I found it." Catherine's breath caught, and for a moment she just stared at him. Then she closed the distance between them, reaching up to touch his face with trembling fingers. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid of caring about someone again, of losing again. I do not know if I can survive it twice." Donovan covered her hand with his own, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. "I am afraid too, but I am more afraid of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and desperate all at once. Catherine's arms went around his neck, and he pulled her close, mindful of his still healing shoulder, but unable to stop himself from holding her as if she might disappear. They kissed like people who had been starving without knowing it, like they could pour all their loneliness and longing into this single moment and somehow make it enough. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Katherine rested her forehead against his chest. "Stay," she said. "Not just until you are healed or until the roof is fixed. Stay." "Yes," Donovan said, and it felt like the easiest promise he had ever made. "Yes, I will stay." They held each other as the storm raged outside, as water continued to drip through the ceiling into waiting buckets. And for the first time since her husband died, Katherine allowed herself to hope that maybe the future held something more than just survival. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Donovan felt like he had found a place he belonged. But he still had not told her the whole truth about the robbery, about why he had been running. And as he held her close, he knew that secret was a weight he would have to lay down soon if they were to have any real chance at a future together. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out in the night. True to his word, Donovan spent the day assessing the roof damage and making a list of the materials he would need to fix it properly. Katherine worked beside him, and there was a new ease between them now, a comfort that came from having acknowledged what was growing between them. "I will need to go into Independence for supplies," Donovan said that evening. "The lumber here is not enough for a proper repair." He saw Katherine tense, saw the flicker of worry cross her face. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if you can spare me for a day. The sooner I get the materials, the sooner I can make sure your roof does not turn into a waterfall next time it rains." Katherine nodded slowly. "Of course. That makes sense." But Donovan could see she was afraid he would not come back, that like her husband before him, he would leave and never return. He took her hands in his. "Katherine, I am coming back. I promise you that. This is my home now if you will have me." "I will have you," she said softly. "I just need time to believe it is real, that you are real and not just some fever dream I conjured up in my loneliness." He kissed her forehead. "I am real, and I am not going anywhere except to town and back." The ride into Independence the next morning was the first time Donovan had been back since the day of the robbery. He felt exposed as he rode down the main street, hyper-aware of every glance from passers-by, every whisper behind hands. But no one stopped him. No one called out or came running with accusations. It was possible no one had seen him clearly that day, or that, in the chaos, no one realized he had been there at all. He was loading lumber into a borrowed wagon outside the general store when a voice stopped him cold. "Well now, if it is not Donovan Mitchell. Heard you were dead." Donovan turned to find Sheriff Tom Brennan standing there, thumbs hooked in his belt, expression neutral but eyes sharp. Brennan was a good lawman, fair but unbending, and Donovan had worked with him during his brief stint as a deputy 2 years back. "Not dead," Donovan said carefully. "Just recovering from an injury." "Interesting timing on that injury," Brennan said. "Seeing as how there was a robbery at this very store about a month back. 3 men came in, guns drawn. They got away with near $500, but one of them got shot by the clerk before they cleared the door. Donovan's heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his expression calm. I heard about that. Bad business. Thing is, I have been trying to track those men down, got descriptions such as they are, and I got a report that someone saw a man matching your description riding hell-bent out of town that same day. Man had blood on his shirt. This was it, the moment Donovan had known was coming. He could lie, could try to explain it away. But he was tired of running, tired of secrets, and if he wanted a real future with Katherine, it had to be built on truth. "Sheriff, I need to tell you something," Donovan said. "And I hope you will hear me out before you decide what to do about it." Brennan's expression did not change, but he nodded. "All right, talk." "I was in the store that day," Donovan admitted, "but I was not one of the robbers. I was just buying supplies when they came in. When the shooting started, I tried to stop them. One of them shot me before they ran. I rode out because I was bleeding bad and not thinking straight, and I was afraid of how it would look. I know that was stupid. I know I should have stayed and explained. But I just wanted to get clear of town until I could figure out what to do." Brennan was silent for a long moment, studying Donovan's face. "The clerk, Johnson, he said someone tried to fight back, said it happened so fast he could not be sure who was who. But he thought maybe someone got caught in the middle." "That was me," Donovan said. "I swear to you, Tom, I had nothing to do with that robbery. I was trying to stop it." The sheriff rubbed his jaw, thinking, "Where have you been all this time? You just disappeared." "I made it a few miles out of town before I passed out. A woman found me, nursed me back from the edge. I have been recovering at her place. This woman got a name, Katherine Lawson. She has a homestead about 3 miles northeast of town." Brennan nodded slowly. "I know the widow Lawson. Good woman, tough as nails. She vouches for you. She saved my life," Donovan said simply. "And I am trying to build a life with her now if I can, but I needed to clear this up first. I cannot start fresh with this hanging over my head." The sheriff was quiet again, weighing his words. Johnson remembered the robbers' faces well enough once the dust settled. "We got them all caught about 2 weeks ago, tried to spend some of that stolen money down in Kansas City. Not a one of them matched your description beyond being white men of average height. Johnson confirmed you were not among them when we showed him the prisoners." Relief flooded through Donovan so suddenly his knees felt weak. "So I am clear. Far as the robbery goes, yes, though I got to tell you, running like you did raised all kinds of questions. You should have stayed, should have told us what happened." "I know. I made a mistake. I was hurt and scared and not thinking straight." Brennan sighed. "Well, the law is satisfied you are not guilty of robbery, but let this be a lesson to you, Mitchell. Running just makes you look guilty, and it makes my job harder. Next time something like this happens, you stay put and let the law sort it out." "There will not be a next time," Donovan said with feeling. "I have had enough excitement to last me a good long while." The sheriff actually smiled at that. "Fair enough. You give my regards to Mrs. Lawson, and you take care of her, you hear? She has had a hard time of it." "I intend to," Donovan said, and meant it with everything in him. He finished loading the wagon and made the trip back to Katherine's homestead with a lighter heart than he had carried in weeks. The secret that had been weighing on him was finally cleared, and he could move forward without that shadow hanging over them. Katherine was waiting for him when he pulled up to the cabin, and the relief on her face when she saw him was almost painful in its intensity. She ran to him as he climbed down from the wagon, and he caught her in his arms, spinning her around despite the protest from his healing shoulder. "You came back," she said, and he heard tears in her voice. "I told you I would," he said, setting her down but not letting go. "And I have more good news. I spoke with Sheriff Brennan in town. That whole business from the robbery, it is cleared up. They caught the real culprits, and the sheriff knows I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I am free and clear." Katherine pulled back to look at him, confusion and something like hurt flickering across her face. "Robbery? Donovan, what are you talking about?" And so he told her everything. About being in the store when the robbers came, about trying to stop them and getting shot for his trouble, about running because he panicked, and about how the secret had been eating at him ever since. Katherine listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You should have told me sooner." "I know. I was afraid. Afraid you would think I was a criminal, afraid you would send me away. I have been caring for you, trusting you, opening my heart to you," Katherine said, and there was anger in her voice now. "And all this time you were keeping something this big from me." "I am sorry," Donovan said. "I should have told you right away. I was wrong to keep it from you." Katherine turned away from him, arms wrapped around herself. "My husband kept secrets from me too. Small things at first, then bigger ones. By the time he died, I realized I barely knew him at all. I swore I would never let that happen again." Donovan felt something cold grip his chest. "Katherine, please. I am not your husband, and I am telling you everything now. No more secrets, no more hiding. I want us to start clean." She stood there for what felt like an eternity, and Donovan was terrified he had ruined everything before it even had a chance to properly begin. Then she turned back to him, and though there were tears on her cheeks, she reached for his hand. "No more secrets," she said. "If we are going to do this, if we are going to try to build something together, it has to be on honesty, complete honesty." "I swear it," Donovan said, pulling her close. "You know everything now. Every stupid decision I have made, every mistake, it is all yours." They held each other as the afternoon sun beat down and the prairie wind whispered through the grass. And though the hurt of his deception would take time to fully heal, they had taken the first step toward something real. Over the next few weeks, they worked together to repair the roof and shore up the rest of the homestead against the coming winter. The work was hard but satisfying, and as they labored side by side, the trust between them rebuilt itself brick by brick, nail by nail. They talked about everything now, sharing their thoughts and fears and dreams without reservation. Donovan told Katherine about the years he had spent drifting, about the loneliness of never having a place to call home. Katherine told him about the dreams she and her husband had shared, and about the new dreams she was beginning to allow herself to have now that Donovan was here. "I used to think loving someone meant losing yourself," Katherine said one evening as they sat by the fire. "That you had to choose between being your own person and being part of something with someone else." "And now?" Donovan asked. "Now I think maybe love is supposed to make you more yourself, not less. With you, I feel like I can be strong and soft all at once, like I do not have to choose." Donovan took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I have spent most of my life afraid to care about anything too much because I thought it would make me weak. But caring about you, building this with you, it makes me want to be stronger, want to be better." "You are already better than you know," Katherine said softly. As September gave way to October and the prairie grass turned gold, Donovan realized he wanted to make their arrangement permanent. He wanted Katherine to be his wife, wanted to stand up in front of whatever God and witnesses they could find and promise her forever. But he was nervous about asking, uncertain if she was ready for that kind of commitment. He sought advice from the most unlikely source. During another trip into Independence for winter supplies, he found himself in the general store talking to the clerk, Mr. Johnson, the same man who had been there during the robbery. Once Johnson understood that Donovan had been trying to help that day, he had been apologetic and friendly. "I want to ask Katherine Lawson to marry me," Donovan admitted as Johnson rang up his purchases. "But I am not sure how to do it, or if it is too soon." Johnson, a man in his 50s with kind eyes, smiled. "Too soon is different for everyone, son. My wife and I knew each other 3 weeks before I proposed. Been married 32 years now." 3 weeks, Donovan said, surprised. "When you know, you know. And from what you have told me about Mrs. Lawson and all she did for you, sounds like you two have been through enough together to know what you are made of. Sometimes hardship teaches you more about a person in a month than comfort does in a year." Donovan considered this. "That is true enough. My advice: be honest with her about what you want and why. Women appreciate a man who is not afraid to speak his heart, and get her a proper ring if you can. Does not have to be fancy, just something that shows you put thought into it." Donovan left the store with supplies and a simple gold band he purchased from the town's jeweler. It was not elaborate, but it was well made and honest, which felt right for Katherine. He spent the entire ride back to the homestead rehearsing what he would say, trying to find words big enough to contain what he felt. In the end, the moment chose itself. That evening, as they finished dinner and sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Katherine rested her head on Donovan's shoulder with a contented sigh. "I love these moments," she said, "when the day is done and we can just be still together." "Katherine," Donovan said, his heart hammering, "I need to ask you something." She lifted her head to look at him, and he saw curiosity and a hint of nervousness in her eyes. "What is it?" Donovan took her hands in his, holding them carefully like they were something precious. "I know we have not known each other long by most standards, but these past 2 months with you have been the best of my life. You saved me, not just from dying but from the half-life I was living before. You made me want to be the kind of man who deserves a home, a family, a future." Katherine's eyes widened, and he saw her realize where this was going. "I am not a rich man," Donovan continued. "I do not have much to offer except my hands, my heart, and a promise that I will work every day to make you happy. But if you will have me, Katherine, I want to spend the rest of my life by your side. Will you marry me?" He pulled out the ring, and Katherine's hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling too, bright and wide. "Yes," she said, and it came out half laugh, half sob. "Yes, Donovan, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then she was in his arms, and they were both laughing and crying at once. They kissed with the joy of two people who had found something they had stopped believing existed, something worth every hardship that had brought them to this moment. They were married 3 weeks later in Independence, in a simple ceremony at the small church with Sheriff Brennan and Mr. Johnson and his wife standing as witnesses. Katherine wore a dress of deep blue that brought out her eyes, and Donovan wore the best clothes he owned, mended carefully by Katherine's hand. It was not a grand affair, but it felt perfect and true. The winter that followed was cold but full of warmth where it mattered. Donovan and Katherine settled into married life with the ease of two people who had already weathered storms together. They worked hard to improve the homestead, adding a room onto the cabin and bringing in more livestock. Money was tight, but they made do, finding joy in small things and in each other. Donovan took work where he could find it, hiring on with neighboring ranches during busy seasons, while Katherine tended their own land and animals. She also began taking in sewing and mending work from town, her neat stitches and reasonable prices earning her a steady stream of customers. Together, they built something solid. Spring came, and with it, the hard work of planting. They worked from dawn until dusk, and Donovan marveled at his wife's strength and determination. Katherine never complained, never wavered, even when the work was backbreaking. But she also learned to lean on him, to accept his help and support without seeing it as weakness. They were becoming a true partnership. One evening in late May, as they sat on their porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Katherine took Donovan's hand and placed it on her belly. "There is going to be 3 of us come winter," she said softly. It took a moment for her meaning to register, and when it did, Donovan felt like all the air had been knocked from his lungs. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be. I have been feeling poorly in the mornings, and I am late with my monthly courses. I have been through this before, Donovan. I know the signs. Before, with her first husband, with a baby that had never drawn breath because the cholera took them both." Donovan saw the fear in Katherine's eyes, the terror of hoping for something when hope had failed her before. "You are going to be fine," he said fiercely, pulling her into his arms. "Both of you. I am not going anywhere, and we are going to see this through together. Promise me," Katherine whispered against his chest. "Promise me you will not leave me alone." "I promise." "I swear on everything I am, Katherine. I am here. I am staying. You and our baby, you are my whole world." They held each other as night fell around them, making promises in the dark that they would keep in the light. The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine suffered terrible morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and she was often exhausted beyond measure. Donovan did everything he could to ease her burden, taking on more of the heavy work, bringing her crackers and weak tea in the mornings, rubbing her feet when they swelled in the summer heat. He was terrified, though he tried not to show it. Every time Katherine winced or looked pale, his heart would stop, certain that something was going wrong. But she was stronger than her fears, and as the months passed and her belly grew round with their child, some of the terror faded into cautious hope. They prepared for the baby together, Donovan building a cradle with his own hands while Katherine sewed tiny clothes and blankets. It felt surreal, making ready for this new life they had created together. Sometimes Donovan would catch himself just staring at Katherine, overwhelmed by the miracle of it all. "What are you thinking?" Katherine asked one August evening, catching him watching her as she knitted. "That I almost died in the dirt outside your cabin," Donovan said. "And now here we are, about to bring a whole new person into the world. It feels impossible that this is my life." Katherine set down her knitting and reached for his hand. "We have been lucky," she said. "Luckier than we had any right to be, given where we both started." "Not luck," Donovan said. You made this possible. You saw something worth saving in a half-dead stranger, and you gave everything to bring me back. This life, this family, it all started with your kindness." "You saved me too," Katherine said. "Maybe not from dying, but from being alone. From thinking that the rest of my life would just be survival and nothing more. You gave me back the ability to hope." As autumn painted the prairie in gold and red, they both grew increasingly nervous about the approaching birth. Donovan made arrangements with a midwife in town, Mrs. Clara Henderson, a capable woman who had delivered half the babies in the county. She promised to come when Katherine's time arrived, no matter the weather or hour. The baby came on a cold December night with snow falling soft and silent outside. Donovan rode hell-bent for town to fetch Mrs. Henderson, his heart in his throat the entire way. By the time they returned, Katherine was well into labor, pacing the cabin and breathing through contractions that left her gasping. The next hours were the longest of Donovan's life. He held Katherine's hand, wiped sweat from her brow, and felt utterly helpless in the face of her pain. But Mrs. Henderson was calm and competent, talking Katherine through each stage, encouraging her when she faltered. "I cannot do this," Katherine sobbed at one point, exhausted beyond measure. "I cannot." "You can," Donovan said, holding her face in his hands. "You are the strongest person I know. You can do anything." "Stay with me," Katherine begged. "I am not going anywhere. I promised you that. I am right here." When their son finally arrived in the early hours of December 10th, 1879, his first cry was the sweetest sound Donovan had ever heard. Mrs. Henderson cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Katherine's arms. "You have a fine, healthy boy," the midwife said with a tired smile. Donovan stared down at the tiny red-faced creature in his wife's arms and felt something fundamental shift in his chest. This was his son, part him and part Katherine, impossibly small and perfect. The baby had dark hair like his mother and lungs that proclaimed his displeasure at being born into a cold world. "Hello, little one," Katherine whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We have been waiting for you." "What should we name him?" Donovan asked, gently touching one tiny hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his, grip surprisingly strong. Katherine looked up at Donovan with exhausted joy. "What about James? James Mitchell. It was my father's name." "James," Donovan repeated, testing it out. "I like it. James Mitchell. Welcome to the world, son." The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. James was a demanding baby, wanting to be fed every few hours and crying when he was not held. But neither Donovan nor Katherine minded. They took turns walking him around the cabin at night, singing soft songs and making foolish promises about the future. Donovan found himself overwhelmed by the fierceness of his love for this tiny person. He had not known it was possible to care about something this much, to feel so vulnerable and so strong all at once. Every time James wrapped his small hand around Donovan's finger, every time he stopped crying when Donovan picked him up, it felt like a gift beyond measure. Katherine blossomed into motherhood with a grace that amazed Donovan. Despite the exhaustion, despite the challenges of caring for an infant through a harsh winter, she seemed more at peace than he had ever seen her. The shadows that had haunted her eyes when they first met were gone, replaced by a contentment that came from holding her child close and knowing her husband was by her side. They weathered that first winter as a family of three, huddled together against the cold, learning the rhythms of their new life. Donovan continued to take work where he could, but he arranged it so he was never gone for long. He could not bear to be away from Katherine and James for more than a day or two, could not stand the thought of missing any moment of his son's growth. By spring, James was beginning to smile and make happy noises, his dark eyes focusing with increasing awareness on the world around him. Donovan would hold him for hours, talking to him about everything and nothing, making promises about the life they would build together. "I am going to teach you to ride," Donovan told his son one warm April evening as they sat on the porch, "and to work hard and treat people right. I am going to make sure you know you are loved every single day of your life." Katherine came out to join them, resting her head on Donovan's shoulder. "He is lucky to have you as his father." "I am the lucky one," Donovan said. "Both of you, you are everything I never knew I needed." As James grew, the homestead prospered in small but steady ways. They were able to add more livestock, to expand the garden, to make improvements to the cabin that made life a little easier. Donovan's reputation as a hard worker spread, and he found himself with more job offers than he could accept. Katherine's sewing business also grew, and she began training other women in town who wanted to learn her techniques. Life was not without its challenges. There were years when the crops failed, when illness swept through the livestock, when money was so tight they had to make impossible choices about what they could afford. But they faced each difficulty together, their bond growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. James grew from a baby into a curious toddler, then into a bright-eyed boy who followed his father everywhere. and adored his mother with fierce devotion. Donovan taught him to ride when he was 5, just as he had promised, and the pride on Katherine's face as she watched them together made Donovan's chest ache with happiness. When James was 6, Katherine told Donovan she was pregnant again. This time there was less fear and more joy, though Donovan still worried through every stage. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1886, a healthy girl with Katherine's green eyes and a calm temperament that was the opposite of her brother's energy. They named her Margaret, after Donovan's mother, and James took his role as big brother with solemn seriousness. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, telling her stories and showing her his treasures, a boy learning what it meant to love someone smaller and more vulnerable than himself. The years rolled on, bringing changes both large and small. Independence grew from a frontier town into a proper city. The homestead expanded until it was a working farm that provided well for their family. Donovan's hair began to show threads of gray, and Katherine developed fine lines around her eyes from years of smiling. James grew into a young man who inherited his father's sense of honor and his mother's determination. He took over more of the farm work, allowing Donovan to slow down a bit as his old shoulder injury began to ache in cold weather. Margaret became a skilled horsewoman and helped her mother with the household and the sewing business that still brought in steady income. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Donovan and Katherine stood on the porch of the home they had built together, watching the sunset paint the prairie sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson. So much had changed since the day he had stumbled onto her property more dead than alive, since she had made the choice to save a stranger's life. But some things remained constant. "You remember the night I proposed?" Donovan asked, his arm around his wife's waist. Katherine leaned into him. "I remember thinking you were either the bravest man I had ever met or the most foolish, asking me to marry you after knowing me less than 3 months. Both, probably," Donovan admitted with a laugh. "But I would do it all the same if I had the choice again. No regrets." Katherine asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Not a one. You gave me everything, Katherine. A home, a family, a reason to be better than I was. Every good thing in my life started the day you decided I was worth saving." "You were always worth it," Katherine said softly. "I knew that the first time you opened your eyes and looked at me. There was something in you that recognized something in me, something that said we were meant to find each other." They stood together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, the sounds of their children's laughter drifting from inside the house. James was teaching Margaret some card game, their good-natured bickering a familiar and beloved sound. Donovan thought about the man he had been before Katherine, drifting from place to place with no anchor, no purpose beyond survival. That man felt like a stranger now, someone from another life entirely. The man he had become was rooted here, in this land, in this family, in the love that had saved him in every way a person could be saved. "What are you thinking?" Katherine asked, the same question she had asked him hundreds of times over the years. "That I am home," Donovan said simply. "That I have been home since the moment I woke up and saw your face, and that I will be home as long as I have you beside me." Katherine reached up to kiss him, sweet and familiar, a kiss that contained 20 years of shared history and the promise of however many years they had left. When they pulled apart, she was smiling. "Come inside," she said. "Margaret made a cake and James is convinced he can beat you at cards this time." "He cannot," Donovan said with certainty, taking her hand. "Probably not," Katherine agreed, "but we will let him try anyway." They walked inside together, into the warmth and light and laughter of the life they had built from fever dreams and determination. and a love neither had believed they deserved. Behind them, the prairie stretched out under an endless sky, witness to all the ways they had saved each other, all the ways they would continue to save each other, every day for the rest of their lives. The years continued to pass with the gentle insistence of prairie seasons. Donovan and Katherine watched their children grow into adults, watched James court and marry a gentlewoman named Sarah from town, watched Margaret become a teacher at the school in Independence. They became grandparents when James and Sarah gave them 2 granddaughters, and the house that had once held just Katherine alone now rang with the voices of 3 generations during Sunday dinners. Donovan's shoulder ached more with each passing winter, a constant reminder of the bullet wound that had brought him to Katherine's door all those years ago. But he never regretted it, never wished that day had gone differently. Every twinge of pain was proof that he had lived, that he had been given a second chance, and had made the most of it. On their 30th anniversary, Katherine suggested they take a trip back to the place where it all began, to the spot where Donovan had fallen from his horse, more dead than alive, and she had found him. They rode out together on a warm June morning, their horses moving at an easy pace across land they knew as well as their own heartbeats. The place was unmarked, unremarkable to anyone who did not know its significance. Just a patch of prairie like any other, grass and wildflowers swaying in the wind. But to them, it was sacred ground. "Right there," Katherine said, pointing. "That is where you were lying when I found you. Your horse was standing over you like he was trying to protect you." "I do not remember any of that," Donovan admitted. "The fever had me by then." "You were gray as ash," Katherine continued. "And when I touched you, you were burning up. I was sure you were going to die before I could even get you back to the cabin. But somehow we made it, and somehow you held on." Donovan dismounted and helped Katherine down from her horse. They stood together at the spot, and he tried to imagine what it must have been like for her, finding a dying stranger on her land, making the choice to help when it would have been easier to walk away. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Really? You told me once it was because you knew what it was like to have no one care. But you could have just left me, could have ridden to town for help. Why did you risk so much for someone you did not even know?" Katherine was quiet for a moment, considering. "I suppose because I was dying too in my own way. Not from fever or a bullet wound, but from loneliness and grief. Saving you gave me a reason to keep going, something to focus on besides my own pain. And then, when you lived, when you started to heal, I realized I was healing too. We saved each other, Donovan. That is the truth of it." He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, the familiar warmth of her body against his. 3 decades together, and he still marveled at the gift of her presence, still felt grateful every morning when he woke beside her. "I love you," he said, simple and true. "I have loved you since I opened my eyes and saw you there, though it took me time to understand what that feeling was. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Katherine replied. "My fever dream cowboy who decided to stay." They stood there for a long time, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would outlast them both. In their children and grandchildren, in the land they had tended, in the love that had sustained them through every trial, their story would continue long after they were gone. As the sun climbed higher, and the day grew warm, they remounted their horses and rode back home together, crossing the same ground Katherine had crossed all those years ago with an unconscious man draped across her saddle. But this time, they rode side by side, partners in every sense of the word, heading toward a future they would face together. The farmhouse came into view, sturdy and well-maintained, surrounded by the evidence of decades of hard work and dedication. Smoke rose from the chimney where Margaret was likely cooking Sunday dinner, and they could see James's wagon already parked outside. His family arrived early as usual. "Ready to face the chaos?" Katherine asked with a smile. "With you beside me," Donovan replied. "Always." They rode home together through the prairie they loved, toward the family they had built, carrying with them the knowledge that every good thing in their lives had started with a choice to save a stranger, a choice to hope when hope seemed foolish, a choice to love when love seemed impossible. It was a story they would tell their grandchildren someday, when those children were old enough to understand that the greatest adventures were not always about action and excitement, but sometimes about finding someone worth staying for, someone worth building a life with, someone worth loving through fever and hardship and all the long, ordinary days that added up to a life well lived. And as they reached the house and were swept up in the joyful chaos of family, Donovan caught Katherine's eye across the crowded room and saw his own contentment reflected back at him. They had done it. They had taken that moment when death and life hung in the balance and turned it into something lasting, something real, something that would echo through generations yet to come. They had built their happily ever after not in spite of the challenges they faced, but because of them, forged in fever and tempered by love into something unbreakable. This was their legacy, and it was enough.